Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I wanted to talk about another layer that Dungeons and Dragons players, and which I call Dragon Masters. So when I say Dragon Master, I mean a Dungeons and Dragons player. Okay. All right. Thanks for your patience there. Let's keep moving. All right. So when a Dragon Master sits at the table, what do they encounter? Sits at the Dungeons and Dragons table. What do they encounter before, excuse me, before they reach the game layer? Let's say there's a game layer. A lot of people think that Dungeons and Dragons is a game. There's a few clues that it's a game. I don't believe that. But let's meet the D&D community where they're at. I think still many people within the Dungeons and Dragons community consider Dungeons and Dragons a game. And I want to talk about the layers that someone encounters before they reach that final layer. Layers and layers and layers and layers down. That final layer, right? What are they of game? What do they encounter before that? So let's walk it through. So I've talked about history, reputation, the table, and curation. All right, these are all layers. And what I want to talk about today is lore. Dungeons and Dragons lore. Dungeons and Dragons lore is an incredible part of Dungeons and Dragons, and you encounter it before you really reach the game, right? People come and you sit down, and there's an expectation. There's an expectation about Dungeons and Dragons because of the lore it's built for 5 decades. So what is Dungeons and Dragons lore? And so that's a fascinating question, and I want to answer it right now. Dungeons and Dragons lore is preeminently, iconically, for the first time in all of history, it is American fantasy. It defines American fantasy. Dungeons and Dragons, more than any other element in the world, has 100% defined American fantasy. So what is American fantasy? First of all, the foundation of American fantasy is Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's work, okay? And there's a new transparency from Hasbro about this, that when Dungeons and Dragons came out, we're about to get a book that will literally give you all the proof of this. Like, Dungeons and Dragons literally just stole Tolkien's legacy. It's not debatable anymore. They're literally putting it into, Hasbro is printing it in a book and saying, hey, look what we did at the beginning, right? Like, not Hasbro, but like, you know, well, look what Dungeons and Dragons did at the beginning. It literally systematized Tolkien, right? So we can't get around that. We have to acknowledge that. It's really critical to acknowledge that and be open and honest about that. That Dungeons and Dragons is preeminently systematized J.R.R. Tolkien, right? And that the dwarf, the elf, and the human, the orc, the hobbit, that's it, man. Like, that's D&D species at the base, right? Then American fantasy, you go way farther than that, right? So now mix in Greyhawk, mix in Forgotten Realms, and mix in, not a joke, 30 other official settings that have been made in Dungeons and Dragons over 50 years. So get this. If you added a new setting to Dungeons and Dragons every 2 years, you'd have to cram in another 10. Right? Did you catch that? Like, there is an astonishing number of official settings for Dungeons and Dragons, right? And that is the lore of Dungeons and Dragons. And when you come to the table, there is this amorphous expectation that has been established by the lore of Dungeons and Dragons. And this comes before you ever reach the game, layer, right? And I want you to be crystal clear right now, right? Christopher Perkins, Amanda Heyman, Mackenzie DeArmas, Jeremy Crawford. Actually, you don't see him that often, I don't think. But I see Christopher Perkins a lot more. Todd Kenrick. And Kyle Brink. He came through the storm. That dude got struck by lightning, got windswept with a bunch of storm rain, right? And still came out the other side standing and defeated every OSR in every indie whiner who complained about him. That dude is awesome, in my humble opinion. That dude is a storm chaser. He is like, he's something, right? Like, he got swept up in the tornado and landed on his feet. Kyle Brink, man, that dude don't play, right? So it's very fascinating. And they are all, right now, who is Vecna? Who are the Wizards 3? Let us tell you about Forgotten Realms. Let us tell, like, they are trying, like, and the reason why is American Fantasy is amorphous. And a lot of people don't understand that really Dungeons & Dragons has really fully defined American Fantasy and continues to define American Fantasy. And here's the kicker. American Fantasy has now become 10 times more valuable than British Fantasy ever was. And you can put any other country's name in front of fantasy, ain't nobody care. Ain't nobody know it. Ain't nobody, it's not even, it's an asterisk on British Fantasy, and American Fantasy has passed British Fantasy. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. Nothing more, nothing less. What's important is when I get to your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.